Namaskar, my guest today is Mr. B.V. Dhoshi, who's been a pioneer of Indian modern architecture, and he's also been an educationist and an institution builder. We decided to meet him at his office Sangat so that we could get a feel of both his work and life around his work. So Dhoshi, I'd like to begin by asking you the obvious question: why did you choose architecture as your profession?
You will be surprised. My whole life is full of accidents. I was born in a family who were dealing in furniture.
Okay.
And none of our people had gone even up to the college level.
Okay.
But it was my drawing. I had joined a class. And that is that teacher there when I joined the Ferguson College in science. He says, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "I don't know." Then he said, "But then you will eventually end up by getting into furniture workshop. So why don't you go to architecture school in Bombay? There is a JJS college." And he says it has future prospects. So why don't you try? So that is how I went into architecture.
So he must have seen that you're very creative with your work, and you could identify space and things like that.
I don't think so. I was not a very good artist either, but I was reasonably good. And once one of my watercolors was in the Bombay Art Society that time.
Okay.
So it was fairly good, and I would have perhaps become an artist.
But then you chose to do this, and you never sort of had doubts about it after that?
No, I don't think that if I look back, I think all my life it has been a flow of a certain kind. So I went into architecture, then I was not well.
Oh, okay.
So in order to help me, there was a senior student who was staying in the hotel. It was a guest house.
Okay.
And he saw me and he says, "Look, I'll help you." So we became friends. Then he was going to London to get a job and to finish his RIBA, our normal diploma at that time that was available. And he says, "Look, I'm going there, so if I get a job there, then I'll call you."
Achha.
So he sent me a letter and I left the school halfway. JJ College, I did not complete the 4th year.
Okay.
And I went to London.
Okay.
And there, I spent for almost 6-8 months, and there was a conference. And I heard about it, that there is a conference which I did not know about at all. See, my education was not really that profound or in detail. So when I went to that conference, I met by chance a Colombian, and that was the time Corbusier was doing Chandigarh. So it was a Siam Congress. It was a Congress of the professional architects. And he was presenting the project of Chandigarh. That was in 51.
Okay.
So I was there and I met a Colombian, and he says, "You are an Indian?" I said, "Yes." He says, "What is the name of this city? What does it mean?" I said, "Chandigarh implies perhaps it's the goddess's name." So I said, "Show me what you are doing." I mean, it was impossible for me to read those plans. But then I said,
detailed, is it?
Yeah, not only that, it was a conceptual plans presented.
Okay.
And then he said, "Here is the Corbusier." He showed me from far away. Then eventually I asked him, the next day I met him again. So I asked him, "Can I join his office?"
Okay.
He says, "I don't know, you apply in your handwriting." So I went back to the guest house, and I had to do the letter in English 4 or 5 times because my education was not in English.
Okay.
So I wrote a letter and I got a reply from him that if you want to join, you come here, but we will not pay you for 8 months.
Okay.
So I said, "Doesn't matter." So I took my bag, and within a week I was in Paris.
Oh, wonderful.
Not knowing French, not knowing about Corbusier's work, I landed there, but it was more than 3 years that I worked with him.
Right.
And that period was the best
Very
period of his
adventurous.
career. Chandigarh was going on, and I was given the drawings to do of the High Court.
Okay.
And then there were 4 jobs of Ahmedabad. The millionaire's office building, the museum, and the 2 houses, the Sarabhai house and the Shodhan house. So I was given the chance to work on them, and that is how I became acquainted. And then he asked me to go to Chandigarh, because I said now it's time, I must go back home, and I was not well. So he said, no, you go as a special architect to do the assembly project, Parliament building.
Okay.
So I came to Chandigarh as a special officer, and in 3 weeks' time I said, this is probably not the right place. So that is how
Why is that?
You know, in a government job there are all kinds of situations. You know, I don't think temperamentally I am suited to work under or with somebody and follow the routine. You know, you get stages. You know, you go from one position to the other, and you are in the world there. Perhaps, I don't know. And they all thought that I did not have a diploma, but they have forgotten that I had. So I thought this is not a place. So I told him that I will come to Ahmedabad. I was decided not to go anywhere. Suddenly I realized that the person who was supervising Ahmedabad projects had to go back to Paris for his military service, Jean-Louis Verret.
Okay.
So I asked Corbusier, maybe I'll go back to Ahmedabad. I'll not go back, but I'll go to Ahmedabad. That is how I landed in Ahmedabad.
Oh,
that was in '54.
Just rewinding a bit, your schooling was where?
In Pune.
Okay.
I was a Gujarati speaking in Maharashtrian. I was almost a semi-Maharashtrian.
Okay, okay. So, all right. So, and your experience of 3 years working with Corbusier, what was it that you felt was the biggest learning from that in terms of work?
First is that I learned that if you know less, and if you don't know the language also, then your sensitivities open up. Your eyes, your proportions, your sense of value, and if you are drawing with hand. And Corbusier was mostly sitting with me on the table, teaching me all this. So that was the best learning I had, because his teaching was connected to the movement of people, the life of people, and how they really work. So it was really very much socio-anthropological way of working in architecture. So you don't create space without knowing what the space is for and how behavior happens. That was the best part I learned. Second part I learned from him was how to work with forms and structure. Third was light.
Can you explain a little bit about working with form and structure?
You see, the architecture basically is measured by the way we move inside a building or the way we see and get attracted by a building. Then the whole question is, once you go in, then there must be elements of surprises, and the space must unfold. So it is really a guidance for a person to go. So it actually, space compels you to move in a certain way.
Right.
And that is what I learned from him. Second was the juxtaposition of volumes. How do you really articulate volumes? How do you really look at from one side? Actually, it is very much like a human being or animal, living being. It is like saying each element has its specificity, and yet they are interlinked with the rest.
Yeah.
And then there is that movement, there is that liveliness, and that is what I learned.
And when you came back to Ahmedabad, how did you translate that in your work here? If you could specifically
I didn't come back, I just came as an outsider.
Yes,
and
of course,
then,
yes.
And
you're
then
from Pune, yes.
I began to work on Corbusier's buildings after about a year and a half. I had no work. I had got married to a Gujarati here. But yet I had to find a way to go. So I decided to leave and perhaps go to Delhi, where I knew Mr. Kanvinde.
Okay.
But Kasturbai Lalbhai, who was the main person here, the industrialist, whose influence was in, he was the key person to invite Corbusier and Kahn. So he asked me, why don't you stay on here and what is the expense? Do you know, that time I said I only need 500 rupees a month and then I can stay on. He says, I will provide you that money. So that made me continue stay here.
Okay.
So I began my work with low cost housing. He said, this is the building which is costing so much, 5,000 rupees or so. Can you make me a similar building which I need to add to my this Attira Institute? I said, yes, I'll try that. It was the first time I started working on low cost housing. I had worked in Paris with Corbusier on Chandigarh's low cost Pune's houses. So I tried to work here, and Vikram Sarabhai was then the director of Attira. So I did those buildings. That is how I began my career. Then Kasturbai started giving me other projects. Then he gave me Indology Institute.
Yes.
Then the Sarabhais gave me the Shreyas School. And that is how the career slowly began to pick up.
So when you started these projects, there must have been something very endemic to India or Ahmedabad.
Yes.
So what was it that you needed to sort of disconnect with from your experience in Paris and sort of focus on in India, in Ahmedabad?
Actually, I must mention, which I forgot. In Corbusier's office, there was a climatic chart, because for him, India was an experiment.
Yes.
So he talked about light, ventilation, temperatures, humidity, cloud presence.
Yes.
So all those things were in my mind. So first lesson that I learned here was, how do you really work with climate? And incidentally, Ahmedabad clients were very, very pragmatic and very sharp. So they wanted to say, if there is no fan, how will you ventilate the building? How will you insulate a building? How would you make it work, in the minimum space? Now those were the learning process. So actually I learned from Corbusier and then from the clients here.
Okay. And learning from the clients, sometimes what happens is, in today's time, a lot of architects, they say, oh, my client is very difficult and I have too many do's and don'ts from the client and I'm not able to express myself and be as creative as possible. So what is the kind of balance that you try to strike?
Actually, a client is a very essential element in the creativity. It depends upon the intent of the client. Here the clients were very pragmatic and they had no inhibition of any style or pattern. Okay. So they never told me that you do this way or that way. They said, you will give us ventilation, you will give us efficient spaces, and you will give us a building that we need in a certain way. For example, Indology, when I did the building, it was for manuscripts. So in order to keep the manuscript, they say, but we don't want to put any mechanical device. That is how I had to do the basement.
Okay.
And that is how I was doing the work. And then he said, no, your orientation must be north-south, so that the sun doesn't work very much, it is because if you have east-west, then you get morning and evening sun.
Yes.
So this north-south linear buildings became from him as a guiding force. So it was the client's attitude to saving energy, which has stood even now in my mind, that I think in life one must learn about energy, saving cost, making things efficient, so that they can be used also for multi-purpose uses. I think these are not my trainings. This came from the client demand. For example, Vikram Sarabhai was saying, if the temperature is so high, how will you keep the roof cool? So then finally he says, why don't you put only 2 inches of water on the top, and the temperature will always remain the same. And then there is a float valve, so the water will remain only that much. So clients were always asking. Similarly, Dr. Kamla Chaudhary, who was also there with Vikram Bhai, she raised the questions of social behavior. That how people live in a room, how do they live in a society, what kind of attitude they have with neighbors, what is the meaning of a street, lifestyles. So I learned that aspect again from the client. So enlightened client who is not asking about aesthetics or imagery, they are the ones who become really your teachers.
If you were to trace your change in design, or I had asked you earlier, what is your signature style? You said that it's been evolving over the years. But if you were to talk about how it was in the beginning, then in the middle, and now.
There are a couple of constants that I always work. I try to relate with the sky and the ground. So if you look at the School of Architecture, Indology, this building or other buildings, you will find connection with the ground and the sky.
Right. And now coming to this particular project, this is the